Say at like 8 or 10 weeks, you have a miscarriage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, like, I think I read a statistic, and I'm going to make this statistic up, I'm sure, and I'm sure that it's, like, less or more than this, who knows. But I read a statistic a while ago that many pregnancies, people don't even know that they're pregnant, and they end up actually having miscarriages before they even realize that they're pregnant. And so at 8 weeks, they may not even know that they're pregnant. They may have had, like, implantation bleeding at the normal time when their period was supposed to start, and then they have a normal period, which is actually a miscarriage, or a heavier period, which is actually a miscarriage, and so they actually have no idea. And I think the statistic that I read like years ago was like 50% of pregnancies end up in abortion, in miscarriages, which is, I mean, it's crazy, but like, I believe it. So the Georgia bill could possibly lead to women being investigated for miscarriage if they miscarry past that 6-week mark and they are suspected of actually taking like abortion pills. And
I mean, why does their body then abort the fetus? It's their own fucking fault, right? They can't control themselves, so. Ugh. It's so horrible. It's horrible.
It's not great.
I don't even know what to say other than just be stupid about it, because I don't know what to say.
It's not great. It's not great.
And not great is
I can't.
a euphemism.
No, it's a total like understatement. It's like a shit show.
Yeah, hellscape, as I said.
So we talked about Kentucky. Louisiana, again, no abortion after 6 weeks. Like, a lot of these 6-week abortion ones have come within the last, like, couple of months.
And weeks also. It's very recent.
Yeah. Some of them are with the end of May. So Louisiana, no abortion after 6 weeks. Exception for rape, no exception for rape or incest. Allows exception if the life is endangered or if the pregnancy is deemed medically futile. So, like, if the baby, like, it's not developing or it is kind of dead in the womb or XYZ.
Okay.
But who determines if the woman's life is endangered? Who determines if the pregnancy is medically futile?
Exactly, yeah.
Mississippi, same as many of the others, no abortion after 6 weeks, no exception for rape and incest, allows exception if the woman's life is in danger. Missouri, which was passed very recently, I want to say like the end of the month, that is no abortion after 8 weeks, no exception for rape or incest, allows exception if the woman's life is endangered. Ohio, no abortion after 6 weeks, no exception for rape or incest, allows exceptions if the woman's life is endangered. And Utah, which this is not a new law, Utah is a relatively religious state, no abortion after 18 weeks, which is like Arkansas, allows exception for rape or incest if the doctor performing the abortion verifies that the incident was reported to law enforcement. And
what?
And it allows exceptions if the woman's life is in danger. So, a lot of women don't report rapes. A lot of women and children who are abused in their families via incest do not report. And so, and a lot of times you need a parent's permission in order to get, if you're underage, in order to get an abortion, which means who are you asking for permission? The person who abused you.
A lot of times,
of times, yeah.
Yeah. Jesus Christ. That's disgusting.
Yeah. It's awful. So, Texas legislature in Texas, the lawmakers are considering a bill that would threaten women seeking an abortion with the death penalty. So, if you got an if you even sought an abortion, it's like premeditated, like murder.
Well, okay. So because we're pro-life, we're killing women. Is that the logic?
I guess. I don't know. Apparently, they
makes so much sense.
They heard the bill and but they had not passed it.
Okay.
Yes. So this year alone, there have been, and we're just in June right now, so we're halfway through the year. But this year alone, nearly 30 bans on abortion have been introduced, passed, or signed into law in state houses in the United States.
Yeah. So I just want to say one sentence and then I have another question for you. The one sentence that I wanted to say is, it's not just in cases where there's like the direct threat of a death penalty for an abortion that the regulations and the bans of abortion threaten women's lives. also the World Health Organization, they have a statistic that 47,000 women die per year of illegal, botchy abortions. So being against abortion has nothing to do with being pro-life. It can only be pro-life when you don't consider women's lives valuable.
Yeah. I mean, if you're only focusing on the child or the unborn child, as they like to refer to it, then you are completely ignoring the woman in the situation who is born, who is alive. And in a lot of ways, you're also ignoring the potential future life for that unborn child. Yeah, so imagine a woman doesn't actually want to have a child. Maybe they are in a bad financial situation, a bad relationship. They are emotionally not prepared to have a child. We talk a lot of times in our society about how, parents need to be totally prepared to have children and that they're the reason that children end up so fucked up. And yet we are forcing people to have children who are not prepared nor interested in having children. Now, we can also make the argument okay, well, then they should have used contraception, but maybe they did. I mean,
contraception is not 100% safe.
No, not at all. Not at all. So, I mean, it's a bullshit argument in a lot of ways.
Also, one thing that I also want to say is people who say, well, why don't you give the child up for adoption after it's born? Because you don't want to be forced to go through a 9-month pregnancy and that you don't want to have, but I think a child that you don't want to have. Pregnant women are not like baby factories for people who can't have children.
No, and to be honest, nobody wants to have an abortion. Nobody's sitting around saying oh man, I wish I could have an abortion next week. Nobody really wants to have an abortion. Yeah, because
nobody wants to have an unwanted pregnancy. That's why it's called unwanted.
Unwanted, unintended, unplanned, all of those things.
Exactly.
So this is one way that that anti-choice laws are being created to stop the possibility of having abortion in certain states. The other way that's happening is by defunding Planned Parenthood, which already cannot is not allowed to provide government funding for abortions, and they actually just do a lot of contraception and health support for people who are who don't have the financial means for it. But by potentially defunding Planned Parenthood, what they're doing is they're actually taking the ability for women and men, because Planned Parenthood is not just for women, but taking the ability away from them to get low-cost health care and low-cost reproductive health care, and under the guise of not wanting to support abortions with government funding, which they already can't do. So that's what's going on in America.
So why do you think that happens now? Because of course you have a very right-wing government right now and a very right-wing president, but he's not. I mean, I don't want to even imagine for how many abortions Donald Trump already paid for himself.
Allegedly.
I'm sorry. Allegedly. Okay. It doesn't make sense, does it? What is the momentum? Why is it happening now? I don't quite understand it.
It makes sense if they think that they can overturn Roe versus Wade in the Supreme Court. And they think that they might be able to do that because they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 conservative justices on a 9-justice court.
So what you are saying is that now that the Supreme Court is predominantly conservative, conservative people think that they can overturn Roe versus Wade, and that's why they start making those laws in the individual states.
Yes. So what will happen is that they'll be challenged by, and a lot of them are already being challenged by the ACLU and by other organizations, and so they'll be challenged in the courts. They won't go into effect because they'll be challenged by the courts, and they'll go through the state courts and the federal courts, and they'll end up at the Supreme Court, and then we'll have a new precedent set based on how they rule on these new laws.
Okay.
So then what it could do is it could push it back to 18 weeks from the 26 weeks, or it could push it back to 8 weeks, or it could push it back to 6 weeks. You know, it's just constantly pushing the time back at which you are legally allowed to get an abortion or give one, which I think is interesting because when we talked about it in the past, one of the things that you mentioned about Austria is that they have made it so that no doctors actually want to perform abortions.
It's a bit different. So in Austria, abortion is not actually legal, which is something that many people don't know because it's what is called straffrei. So it's exempt from
punishment.
Yeah, it's exempt from prosecution. So it's basically tolerated, but it's not legal. And the law is like that. So in the 1st January of 1975, I think it was, the law, the so-called Fristenlösung, was made into law, basically. And it says that within the first 14 weeks of pregnancy, starting from nidation, it is not legal, but exempt from prosecution to abort a fetus.
Oh.
But it also has a clause, like the paragraph, the legal paragraph also has like this clause that no doctor can be forced to do an abortion.
Oh, got it.
Which is also because it's technically not legal, so you can't force anyone to do something basically illegal, even though it's exempt from prosecution. And that leads to the not just uncomfortable, but very shitty situation that there are like federal states in Austria where there is no, where you can't get an abortion, where there is no like Krankenhaus, no clinic that does abortions. So women have to travel from Vorarlberg to Vienna or whatever.
So it limits access because
it limits access. Also, the costs are very different depending on who does it because there's no actual regulation. Because it's not legal.
Yeah.
And also, in Austria, it's still highly, highly stigmatized, which is kind of the Catholic, it's a very Catholic country still. And there are 3 exceptions to this rule that you can have an abortion within 14 weeks, because you're allowed to have an abortion later than that when there is risk to the life or health of the pregnant person. You can have an abortion later than that, like a late-term abortion, when the fetus is, let's say, strongly disabled in a way that it, for example, could not survive outside of the womb or whatever. So then you can have a very late-term abortion.
That's what they talk about in the medically futile kind of laws in the United States laws.
Yeah. And then there's a third option where you can have an abortion later than the 14th week, which is when it's the result. When the person who's pregnant was younger than, I think, 14 when they became pregnant. Pregnant. So, and in Austria, abortion has been... So, first of all, we had a very conservative right-wing government up to 2 weeks ago. We talked about this in the last episode. And of course, those are parties that are very much against abortion, very conservative. And, in the coalition, like Vereinbarung, like the coalition agreement, they also stated that they would evaluate or reevaluate the regulation when it comes to what you called futile medical pregnancy. In Austria, it's called embryopathische Indikation, which you can translate with embryopathic indication, maybe?
Or,
does that make sense?
Or viability, or,
Yeah. So, but they call it eugenische Indikation.
Eugenic? Are you kidding me?
Yes, exactly. That's what they call it. And of course, that is also already... So anti-choicers call it eugenic indication because they want to stress or want to kind of associate reproductive rights.
Abortionists with eugenics.
Exactly, because you abort like disabled fetuses, so it's basically eugenics.
No, I will say...
And that's also what
the number of people being born with Down syndrome, which is a totally random genetic thing. You can't ever tell based on someone's familial genetics if they're ever going to get Down syndrome. The number of people being born with Down syndrome is significantly less because families abort those kids, which